Hi everyone, it's Kimber, the study abroad specialist. In today's video, we're going to be talking about 3 places in France that you should study abroad that are not named Paris. So before we get started with today's video, I just want to let you know about an exciting freebie that I have for you. So if you look down into the description box, you will find a link to my study abroad starter worksheet. And so with this worksheet, it's going to be great if you are just beginning on your study abroad journey. You're trying to think about, where should I go? What should I do? Should I even be doing this? It's going to be able to give you the chance to just kind of think through your plans a lot more for study abroad. So definitely check that freebie out. It's completely free. You can print it out. You can also work on it on your phone or your tablet as well. So we are back with another installment of the 3 different places where you should potentially study that are not sort of the main city. So I started out, of course, in the UK, thinking about different places in the UK that are not named London. And I definitely want to bring you another installment now looking at France. So the first place we're going to be thinking about is Grenoble. So for our first city on this list, we are talking about Grenoble. Now, Grenoble is really interesting because it's not really a city that you would think about when you first think of France. Outside of just Paris, of course, you might be thinking about Nice or other places. Grenoble is really special because it definitely has a Swiss feel to it. If you've ever been to Switzerland, I've been several times. It's very, very special in terms of just the atmosphere and how sort of different it is from a lot of places in Europe. And Grenoble definitely has that because it is a very mountain rich town. So it is considered sort of the capital of Alps of France, and it's in the southeastern region. So it's a really interesting, it has a lot of that sort of Alp feel in terms of what you're going to be seeing, in terms of the architecture and everything kind of around it. The other thing to note as well is that it is one of those places in France that is perfect to study abroad, similar to Paris, throughout the time, any time of year. So it doesn't matter whether you're interested in going full bore in the winter time, you're going to be able to get some winter action with sort of the mountains being there. But also, too, if you're interested in studying abroad during the spring or the summertime, it's also going to be quite amazing because they tend to have all 4 seasons. So even for students who are going to be there long term, if you're pursuing a full degree there, it's going to be quite exciting. So Grenoble is definitely one of those special places. The other thing as well is that there is a nice mix of locals and tourists. A lot of people who tend to go to Switzerland will also pop over to Grenoble as well. There's not as much skiing involved in Grenoble, but they definitely still enjoy to be able to have that mountain feel. So if you've ever been to a town like a mountain town where there may not be as many outdoor winter sports, but people still enjoy getting to experience that mountain feel, that's what you're going to find in Grenoble. So it's definitely great from that perspective. Some of the things that you might admire about Grenoble in particular is going to be the architecture. So the architecture is known for being very medieval, which is quite exciting. I know that for a lot of people, they're like, oh, like once I've been to one European city, I've seen them all. I think in some ways that can be true, like when you go to the main square. But with a city like Grenoble, there's so much history there, and so much of it is very original, which is what you find across a lot of Europe. So it's been there the entire time. It hasn't sort of been gentrified and remade in a lot of ways like we may do here in the USA, where we sort of remake things and it's not in its original form. So that's something really exciting to think about. The other thing too is that it's quite quaint. This is not really a phrase that you hear a lot about anymore used about cities, but it is quite quaint because it's small. It's not as big as Paris, obviously, but it's still small enough to feel like you can get the feel of the land, but there's still a lot going on. It's super picturesque as well. So for people who love to do social media, for people who love to take a lot of pictures and do a lot of things, there's so much opportunity to do that. And just to be able to kind of soak all that in as you are walking to class or getting out and exploring nature. Again, people like to get out and really experience nature in Grenoble. So you're really going to love that if you're someone who loves to explore on foot or in other ways. And again, it's only 3 hours, 3.5 hours away from Paris. So if you want to be in the heart of a bustling city, you can definitely go ahead and do that for a day or however long you want to stay in Paris. But then you get to come back to Grenoble. Now, in terms of the international students, sort of thinking about that, there are several different universities there. So there are many different what we call anchor universities, which are going to be their primary universities in Grenoble that offer students a variety of different topics. So from everything from the sciences, all types of STEM focused things, engineering, of course, and then looking at more life sciences, looking at some business, there's business schools there. So there's a lot of different things that happen. So if you are a student who's interested in pursuing a full degree in Grenoble, there's definitely an opportunity to do that. And their schools work very similar to the ones in Paris in the way that you apply, and then you're able to go ahead and move forward with your degree. So that is really, really hopeful. Now, if you are an American student specifically, you're quite lucky because outside of Paris, and then some other more well-known cities in France, Grenoble is one of those places where a lot of American universities tend to go as well. So the secret is out. A lot of people have found out about it. And so you do have, if you're interested in doing an independent organized program like AIFS or CIEE, they have programs there. And then there are lots of American based colleges and universities who also have programs in Grenoble. So it's not as quite off the map as it used to be, but it's still a little bit of a kept secret because, again, it's not going to be as big as, let's say, a Geneva in Switzerland, and it's not comparable to Paris in the way that the culture presents itself, but it definitely is a great place that is sort of removed, so you almost don't feel like you're in France, like the traditional idea that you would think of France, but it's a really great experience for students. So a lot of international students always tend to go there for study abroad programs. Another exciting thing as well about Grenoble is that it is definitely student friendly. So as I talked about, the fact that there are so many different programs there for students. Of course, we know that for a lot of American-based colleges and universities, they may have their own housing already figured out, but for a lot of students coming from other parts of the world, if you're interested in getting student housing, there is an abundance of that. So there are, month-to-month apartments that you can rent. There are short stay opportunities. There are long stay opportunities. There are student purpose housing as if you would find any place else throughout Europe. So there's lots of places for students to be able to stay affordably. Now, in thinking about the actual pricing, Grenoble is a little bit cheaper than Paris. It's about 35% cheaper overall in terms of living costs for a student than living in Paris. So that's quite a good amount of savings, just kind of thinking overall of what you would spend your money on. And people often want to know, how much would you need to be able to study in Grenoble? The overall average to study in Grenoble per month for a student, based on your basic student needs, would be about €950 per month. Now, this does not factor in any type of inflation or anything. This is just kind of thinking about the basics. So you could say up to maybe €1,200 per month for what you might need. And of course, you can sort of play around with that based on if you have less of a need or more of a need. But that's a pretty good overall, considering that in Paris, you would need closer to 13 to €1,400 per month to be just kind of basically comfortable. So it's definitely a wonderful saving for that. And I think that that's another great thing, that a place like Grenoble is very student friendly, and there's lots of opportunity for students to be able to find work, because throughout Paris, as long as you are on a student visa, you are able to work some. And so there's great opportunity there as well, because again, as they've been growing and innovating, there's been a lot of different companies that have come into town, and they have more resources to be able to share with people. So it's a really great opportunity, and I would highly recommend Grenoble as an option for study abroad if you don't want to do Paris and you want to do something that's a little bit more original than everybody else. So the next place that we are talking about on our list is going to be Lille. So Lille, France is on the border of Belgium. So it's in that area of Belgium near the Netherlands. So again, I'm talking about some places that are on the borders of other places that are a little bit more unique. Now, with this, I always like to think of it, and I know that this is probably going to ruffle some feathers if you feel like this is not true, but I think that I just think in everything in terms of my two favorite cities outside of the United States, which are either London or Lucerne. And for me, Lille definitely mirrors a lot of Lucerne in a lot of ways over in Switzerland. And just kind of the overall setup of it, it is a lot smaller than a lot of the other cities in Paris. And even though it is very picturesque, it's also too very cultural. So it's very cultural in the sense of there's a nice mix of old and new. And I know that when I spent a lot of time exploring Lucerne, I felt that same way, that you could definitely see the influences of sort of the old style of what things were like, but then also a lot of that new style. And the other thing about Lille as well is that it's quite an artsy place. So if you think about it in terms of that, you have to just imagine that it's not only picturesque and very historic, but it's very artsy. So it's almost one of those places that's kind of very trendy, but it's in a lot of ways like more of a kept secret, because it's not a place where there are just so many study abroad students swarming all the time. They do have their ebbs and flows like everywhere, but it's not going to be one of those places that's always a hustle and bustle. It's not in the middle of everything. So I think that that's one of the things that might be attracted to a lot of students, because if you're going to one of the universities there, they do have several universities, you're obviously going to be around students your age, but it's not going to be a place like Paris that is just always kind of crawling with tourists and different things going on. So again, it's like you get an opportunity to sort of step back and get a different experience within France that you may not have. Again, you're going to have a lot of that Belgium sort of influence as well. There's other smaller countries around nearby that have a lot of influence in terms of the culture that takes place in Lille. So I think that you might really enjoy that for a study abroad program. Now, one of the great things about Lille as well is that it is very student sort of focused in the way that it's built. It wasn't necessarily built for students, obviously, but students who study there really like it because there are lots of things that you don't just have to worry about. So, for example, it is super walkable. And I think that we could say that a lot of places within Europe in particular are walkable. I mean, London obviously is walkable, Paris is walkable, but it's a different type of walkable in the sense of like you could get to the other end of the city within about 10 minutes. You know what I'm saying? So it's a lot more of an ease for students to be able to get around. And I know that that is something that a lot of students worry about. Like, should I bring a bicycle or should I think about getting a car? What is that going to look like? So if you are interested in going to Lille, you're not really going to think about that because people walk everywhere. I mean, we know that people do that in Europe anyway, but people walk everywhere and it's very, very walkable and very easy to get around by foot. And the other great part about that is, as I mentioned earlier, since there are not as many study abroad students there, it means that you have a nice mix of students who have come there, and then students who are just from there, and then students who are maybe staying for a little bit of time, and then you have a lot of locals too. So I've talked about this in the past, how for a lot of places that you may be interested in studying abroad, you're always going to feel like a bit of a tourist, because it may be, if it's a bigger place like Paris, again, you can meet local people whenever you want. But again, if you're in the center of a place like that, there's always something going on. And you always feel like you're always meeting people from like different countries, which is great. But you don't get a sense of the local culture all the time unless you go outside of the city center. Whereas in a place like Lille, there are lots of people there. They've lived there maybe their entire lives. And so you really get a sense of that. And I know that just from doing my research and also talking to some of my students who have studied there, that they definitely make you feel welcome. I think that that's like one of the things that a lot of students worry about, because you do go some places and as a student, you may not feel that welcomed. I know that this is something that I talked about when I studied abroad in Florence, that since it was really kind of just a basis of rowdy American students and old Italians, they weren't really huge fans of us. And I totally understand that, but it definitely didn't always feel like we were that welcomed. And I think that a lot of people in Lille have really sort of embraced the idea that students come to study there and that they really want to be part of the culture. And so that is a really great thing that I have heard so many wonderful things about. So I think you will definitely enjoy that. The last really great thing about Lille is that it's super accessible to other places. So I already talked about the fact that it's right on the Belgium border. So if you want to go to Belgium, you could do that really easily. But you know what I'm going to say next? It is really quick to get over to London, because obviously that's where I would want to go if I was studying abroad in Lille. So it's really quick to get there in about an hour and a half, which is not too bad. Paris, if you want to pop up to Paris for a day or two or however long, it's again only about an hour, 15 minutes. So really quick trips. I think that that's really a great part, of course, about just living in Europe. Now, you do want to keep in mind, though, that Lille is one of these places that if you are looking to, let's say, go to Italy or looking to go over to Switzerland or other places, that you will need to take a plane. So it's not necessarily accessible in that way. Like, let's say Paris would be, where you can just get on a train really quickly and go out to a lot of other places, a lot of other hubs, but you can quickly fly to anywhere that you would want to. And they have a really sort of centralized airport there for people who want to take those short jaunts, because again, it's not going to be that long for you to fly from Lille to Switzerland, but taking the train will take a long time. But I think that that is wonderful, because again, that gives you the ability to have so much access to different things, but not necessarily feel like you have to be in the center of everything. Because I know that for a lot of students, let's say if you are studying in Paris, like even if you do the day trips and all of that, it's a different vibe. It takes more out of you if you are studying in a major city. It really does, because you are trying to deal with so many other things compared to people who study in the outskirts. It's a completely different experience. I think about people who, for example, I know that, and this is something that I really had to think about as well when I was applying to grad schools in the UK. And now, since I've been working with so many students who have gone all over the world and done different things, thinking about what is going to work best for me. And it's really funny, because when I was in undergrad here in America, I preferred a much more kind of smaller, more suburban, more tight knit community. Whereas in London, I actually liked the fact that it was a lot bigger. I got into Kingston University and also University in Richmond, and I didn't want to go to either one of those, because I'm like, I'm going to be missing out. It's like 2 zones away, and I'm not going to ever get to see London. But that was what worked best for me. Whereas I know a lot of students, depending on where you're coming from, you may want to kind of be out in the middle of nowhere. Not necessarily that Lille or Grenoble are in the middle of nowhere, but that it's a different vibe than Paris, obviously. So you're not going to be in the height of everything, but you still are going to have an opportunity to get some good exposure to a lot of the French culture, just in a different way than you would have in Paris. So I highly recommend that. And like I said, for students, there's lots of different accommodations as well. There are several different universities there. So if you are interested in doing a long-term degree program, definitely check those out. I'm going to link some below in the description. Now, one of the things to note is that if you are an American student, for the independent organized programs like AIFS, like CIEE, there's not a lot of those in Lille, unfortunately. I know that there are some American colleges and universities that have connections in Lille, but it's not as many as with Grenoble. So just kind of keeping that in mind, that you may, if you, let's say, want to do like a summer program, you might have to apply directly, or at least research one of the universities that is already there. It may not be through one of the independent organized programs like an AIFS or a CIEE. So just keep that in mind. Now, in terms of how much it actually is going to cost, the average cost for being a student, so for living the student life in Lille, is going to be 850 euro. Again, similar to Grenoble, it's not based on inflation or anything. This is just kind of the basics. So you may have a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. It is definitely about 30% cheaper than Paris, but similar thing. You just have to think about what's going to work best for you. But of course, like, not living in a city center, not living in a big city like that, you're still saving a lot. I mean, 30% is a lot in the world that we live in today. So just consider that as you're sort of thinking about if it might be a place for you and if it might fit your personality and your needs. But I would definitely say that Lille would definitely be on my list of where I would want to study if I decided that I wanted to go to France but did not want to study in Paris. All right, so the third city on my list is going to be Bordeaux. So Bordeaux is a really exciting place. I've been to Bordeaux several times, and I would say that there are three things that would summarize Bordeaux. And so I would say very cosmopolitan, very food based because it is sort of the foodie capital of France, and also it is basically the height of the wine region. So it's a little bit similar to Napa, California, in that way that they just do wine, wine, wine all the time. And I am not a drinker. I do not drink. However, I know that some students like to partake in that. And particularly for my American students, just know that it's okay to do that because in France, you can drink at 18. So I'm not promoting underage drinking, but I'm just saying that you're doing it anyway, and you can actually legally do it in France. So I just wanted to put that out there on the record to say that in Bordeaux, it is the wine capital basically of France and of that region. So if you know anything about the Bordeaux region, that's basically what it is. You'll see that a lot on wine bottles. That's where it comes from. That's what they are known for, and that's what they do. But Bordeaux is very, I would say, like chic and very sleek in that way, that it is sort of a mix between sort of a coastal town, and then also too sort of it's like coastal meets mountain meets kind of urban feel. And so it's a really kind of interesting place because they have so much of the cultural feels that you would find in a place like Paris. It's in a ways like a mini Paris, but they also too, they're a port town. And so there's a lot kind of going on. There's a lot of rich culture there. Again, a lot of authentic culture there that you may not necessarily find in a bigger city, because again, it's not necessarily tailored directly to tourists, although tourists do go to Bordeaux, but it's not so much centered around tourists, it's around preserving the culture, if that makes any sense. And so a lot of students like to go to Bordeaux to study abroad because again, you get that sort of cosmopolitan city feel, but without sort of all of the day-to-day headaches that would come from studying in a place like Paris. Now, it is really great because it's not that far away from Paris. So again, you can hop on a train and go to Paris if you really want to experience that. But you are going to find so much of what you need in Bordeaux. And one of the great things about Bordeaux as well is that because it is part of that region and there's so much kind of going on, it's a really great place for day trips. Now, I know you can take a day trip from anywhere, you know, in Europe and be somewhere really fun. But with Bordeaux, there's so much of that kind of built in because again, because of the winemaking, because of the food, and because of all these different cultural things, there's so many different little places to see. And a lot of students have said that they benefit from that. So they enjoy being able to just kind of quickly, either they have rented a car or maybe they're going to ride with maybe a tour bus, or maybe they're going to do different things. There's so many different things to kind of go and see. And again, even if you're not, let's say, a wine drinker, there's so many opportunities to learn about the wine industry. And again, they're really huge on food as well, and not just kind of basic food, specialty foods, and sort of these like artisanal things. And so it's a really nice place to be if that's going to be your jam, sort of that artsy, but artsy with more style compared to kind of like the, I don't want to say grungy art, but you know, like more like street art that you would find in other places. Like this is much more of like a leveled up art, if you want to think about it that way. So a lot of people really, really enjoy Bordeaux and have enjoyed their time studying there. The other interesting part about Bordeaux is, and this makes sense based on the fact of what really takes place there in terms of the winemaking. And that's a little bit similar to Napa as well, although not as much, but I know that there are other parts of the world where they make a lot of wine, is that it's much more of the Mediterranean feel in terms of not just the culture, but also the climate as well. So you have to consider that there is much more of that Mediterranean. You're going to get some of that sort of Oceania weather coming through. So sometimes it can be a little bit more humid. Sometimes it may be a little bit colder. That actually works really well in terms of being able to make the wine and harvest everything they're going to need to create that, including the fruit and all of that. But from a standpoint of living there, you just have to keep that in mind, that it's not going to be as mild as Lille, and it's not always going to be as sort of cold and kind of super mountainous as Grenoble would be. So it's kind of in that space where they kind of get, I don't want to say like Florida weather if you've ever been to the state of Florida, but it definitely is going to be much more of that Mediterranean. So if you're thinking about, let's say, like a place like Italy, and specifically like Florence, you're going to feel a lot more of that type of weather. So that means that summers are going to be quite warm, and that falls may be a little bit more medium, and then winters maybe they're not going to be like deep freeze, but they're going to be a lot colder than, let's say, a place like Lille. So you just want to keep that in mind as you're going through. As I said, like, climate is one of those things that when people are thinking about university and they're thinking about study abroad or whatever it is related to that, sometimes they don't really consider that. And that is a key part of anything that you do. That's something that you should definitely keep in mind. People think about the sort of external things of where am I going to live? Who am I going to live with? What am I going to be able to do? What is the program going to do? But thinking about the sort of overall climate and the weather and what really suits you is also really important. So just keep that in mind. So in terms of the cost for living as a student in Bordeaux and the Bordeaux region, if you're going to be living a little bit further out, it's going to be about €1,000 per month. So again, it's a little bit more pricey than the other two cities that I mentioned. I think that you could probably imagine that just based on the fact that, again, it is slightly more cosmopolitan. So it's a little bit more on par with Paris, but it's not as expensive as Paris. They do have lots of student housing there. There are several different universities, both in Bordeaux and around the region, that students go to. Now, a lot of students do choose to do summer programs, or they'll do exchange programs at these universities. Similarly to Lille, if you are, let's say, an American student, you're not going to find a lot of independent organized programs there, but there are opportunities to do exchange programs, and there are some American colleges and universities there. And for students from other places, they tend to just go directly to the different universities there. So just kind of keeping that in mind, that it's not going to be as affordable as the other two cities, but it's still a lot more affordable than living in Paris. So out of these three cities, I hope that at least one has piqued your interest. I know that as you're trying to think about where you want to study abroad, it's number one, super nerve-wracking. And number two, a lot of times you're trying to think a little bit more outside the box and just trying to think of, I may want to go to France, but you don't always have to just choose the low-hanging fruit. And I say this as someone who promotes going to the UK and studying in London every single day of my life. But I know that, for example, like I said in that video, that there are people who they don't want to go to London, and that's completely fine. I don't completely understand that train of thought, but here we are. And so I would just say that you want to be able to explore what's going to work best for you. Being in a large city where there's always hustle and bustle, that definitely has its downsides. And so if you are someone that's not going to work for your personality, it's not going to work for your goals, maybe the most important thing you're going there to study and the program that you need is not even there. Do not go there. Go to the place where it is. And it may be in a Lille or a Grenoble or in a Bristol in the UK, or someplace that is not sort of the main highlighted city. That is perfectly fine. So I hope that this was helpful for you and that you've been able to get some good insights and some good ideas, and that you will start exploring these cities and add them to your list of study abroad options. Definitely remember to download the starter worksheet. Also, too, if you have not, please like this video, please share this video, and please subscribe. I release videos every single Friday and sometimes on Wednesdays and Thursdays as well. And I look forward to seeing you in the next one.